to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and my co-host is Caitlin Drake. Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. Today our guests are two of Boston Avenue's associate pastors, Reverend Sara Pugh Montgomery and Reverend Jen Logsdon-Kellogg, along with Caeli Dedmon, who's one of the communications coordinators for Oklahoma Next, UMC. On today's episode, we are discussing the Resist movement in response to the traditional plan and an upcoming Resist worship service. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I would like to know, January 1st is important for many reasons, but in terms of what has been happening in the United Methodist Church around inclusion, can you share why January 1st, 2020 is significant?
Sure. This is Pastor Sara, and this past year in February of 2019, we had a special called General Conference, which resulted in a traditional plan being passed for the United Methodist Church. Now, this plan didn't come into effect at the normal time, which is kind of usually right after a general conference. It just usually kind of starts and flows in, but rather it was set for being set to start on January 1st of 2020. And so this traditional plan is a plan that is placing restrictions and limitations around what clergy are allowed and called to be able to do, and is also putting mandatory sentencing on if somebody is performing a same-gender wedding or around LGBTQ clergy. And so we wanted to be able to kind of speak out against this plan. And so since that plan starts on January 1st, a lot of our movement around the resistance of this will also begin on January 1st.
So Sara, you said our. There are several groups that have emerged to oppose this traditional plan. What are some of those groups that we're all a part of, and what are their areas of focus?
And this is Caeli. One of the groups that has emerged is the Mainstream United Methodist group out of Kansas City, Kansas, and that group mostly focuses on a general conference level and a nationwide level, and even internationally. One of the things that they look at the most is having conversations with our general conference delegates and pushing out literature to those people, and talking with some of the Central Conference delegates from Africa and the Philippines, giving them information and being able to be in conversation with people voting from all around the world. Another group that's emerged is UMC Next, that was founded also out of Kansas City, that had a convening team with people from all around the country. They took 10 people from each annual conference and really talked about what we can do going forward in the Methodist Church. That organization is looking to hold the church together. And they also hosted Leadership Institute in September, which is where the organization Oklahoma Next, UMC, came out of. And so Oklahoma Next, UMC, is recognizing that Oklahoma has a little bit of a different context than other states or annual conferences, and works like Oklahoma Next to bring traditional compatibilists, progressive compatibilists, anyone that's willing to be around the table with one another in order to push the church forward.
There's also the organization Forward, which is pushing for a dissolution of the denomination so that each church can decide its own views on these issues and develop new denominations for traditionalist, centrist, progressive denominations. And then there's also the Reconciling Ministries Network, which actually has pre-existed this crisis for quite a while. And the Reconciling Ministries Network has been working for many years to help churches who do have a more progressive view on LGBTQ clergy and marriage to designate their churches as either reconciling congregations or to form small groups within congregations and designate them as reconciling small groups so that people who are looking to be a part of that kind of a church can easily find it, and so that we could work together collaboratively to move on legislation. And they have been working for a long time, so there's already some groundwork in place for communication with RMN. And they are working in cooperation with some of these other groups.
Why does this resistance movement matter?
The reason the resistance movement matters is because for 47 years, the United Methodist denomination has been tightening discrimination on people who are LGBTQ and on those who are advocating for justice in this area. So in 1972 was the first time that the language entered our Book of Discipline, which said that people who are gay, who are people of sacred worth, and yet that they are incompatible with Christian teaching. For those of us who have studied hard and prayed and determined that to be gay is not to be actively sinning, yet it is not even a choice, it is something that is innate to who we are, that is discriminatory. And we vow in our baptismal vows, we say that we will resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they may present themselves. And sadly, we feel very firmly that is happening within our own denomination. And so to stay quiet would be to be complicit in ongoing discrimination.
And this is Sarah. I think there's also a lot that comes into this personally as well as a clergy person. There's a lot within our Book of Discipline and a lot of rules and a lot of guidelines, a lot of thou shalt nots and things that we're not allowed to do. And now this is the only one that will have a mandatory sentence if we break the rules. And so to be able to create a mandatory sentence and to create a harsh punishment against being able to be a part of guiding couples to declaring their love before God and before congregations, to me personally, just feels like that's also stripping away some of the ways that I'm being called into ministry and into sharing that love with the world. And so I think that there's a strong movement of resistance is also, I think, bubbling up, because even some clergy who might be more centrist really do believe that, to have this be the one place where there's mandatory sentencing goes against our calling and against our narratives and against the authority that we've been given as pastors.
This is Jen again. I want to just say a word, too, that this is not a matter of us deciding that Scripture does not have authority. So that is one of the biggest, really at the root of the disagreement is how we interpret Scripture and how we hold Scripture to be authoritative. So for those who have the more progressive view when it comes to marriage and ordination of LGBTQ people, it is not that we are disregarding the Bible. It's that we are interpreting the Bible through the lens of Jesus and through the lens of science, and that when we have new information, which we do have new and different information now than has been had in the past about issues surrounding LGBTQ people and their biology, that we take that information and fight for justice for all people.
And I think as a young person that was raised in this United Methodist Church, seeing it so broken and so in crisis is something that's very painful. And looking forward and thinking of a possibility of a split church or a different church or a church that continues to be discriminatory towards an entire group of people, none of those options are good. And so I think this resistance movement is really important to show our witness and show that we're not giving up and we're not going home on this church. We're not trying to exclude people, and we're not going to go home.
And I think to that point, this is Caitlin, but I've seen some folks almost try and sheep steal with this kind of situation. So I've seen people go, oh, well, if the Methodist church isn't being inclusive, you can come on down to my church. We're Episcopalian, UCC, whatever it is, Lutheran, that we're open and affirming. But for people who are raised in the Methodist church, like you said, this is their church. And so switching denominations doesn't solve it, right? It might solve it for you personally, but if you are so invested in this church or in this theology or in this history, it's not that easy. It's just swapping over or going down the street to a different church, different denomination.
And I think Sarah mentioned about centrists being more bold and being on the more progressive side. And that's one thing I've noticed is that it was always progressive and the traditionalists. But since General Conference in 2019, there have been more people that are more pastors that are centrists that are, wait a minute, this isn't right. I'm need to fight for LGBTQ equality and so forth. So that's been nice to see as well.
And then there are also people that might have traditionalist views or traditionalist theology, but don't believe that this should be the thing that we bring up clergy on charges, or this shouldn't be the thing that excludes people from being clergy. And so I think we don't include those people in the conversation enough to recognize that they want something different too.
So we kind of danced near it a little bit in that last question, but just to get really specific, this resistance movement that is starting to grow and that we're hoping will really amp up January 1st, what are some possible goals or possible outcomes from this movement? What are we looking towards?
Well, the Resist Harm movement specifically takes the traditional plan at its implementation and says that since we have come to the conclusion that the traditional plan is continuing and even increasing the harm, that to be silent would be to be complicit. And so we take the phrase from our baptismal vows that we resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they may present themselves. And we also take one of our 3 general rules. So in the United Methodist Church, the 3 general rules are: do all the good you can, don't do any harm, and stay in love with God. And so we're taking that general rule, do not do harm, and saying that if we are to stay silent, we are complicit in harm. And therefore, we are working to make people and congregations aware of the difference between how the rules stand now and how they are as of January 1st, the more punitive measures that are taken. And to say, we do not agree with that. And to give people a place to come together for worship, to seek repentance for the ways in which the church has harmed and continues to harm people, to seek to educate the members of the United Methodist Church about our own denomination and what is going on, and to build momentum going forward into General Conference 2020, which happens in May 2020, so that part of at least the Resist Harm movement that I'm aware of is to reach out to the delegates and to let them know that not people who have stayed silent in the past are no longer willing to stay silent, and that the majority does not feel the way the most vocal on either end of the spectrum feel. Do you have anything to add, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that, so with all of that, then you're kind of working towards perhaps some new legislation. So being able to draw together or to write up some new legislation for General Conference, that's a goal for some folks that kind of see the General Conference body as the group that will be able to fix this. For other folks, there's the goal and kind of outcome of the movement is just really the continuation of resisting. And so they will be a part of having marriages within their congregations and their sanctuaries. They'll lift up folks that are LGBTQ within their congregation that have a call to ministry, and they'll be a part of resisting this and have the goal and the outcome of lifting them up and supporting them as a staff parish relations committee and supporting them within their candidacy. So there's a lot of different things that could occur and that could possibly be the goals or the ways that we kind of look at what does this movement move towards, because you can look at that on a local level along with that kind of global church level.
A couple of the other things that it's trying to accomplish is to ask the bishops to suspend trials, to refuse to hold trials for anybody who breaks these rules until after General Conference 2020. And to give local churches the tools and resources they need to resist by whether or not, if the clergy are willing and able to put their own careers at risk to do marriages, to help the SPRCs, the Staff Parish Relations Committees of their churches, to have the resources to support them in that. For churches to host weddings and to be prepared to take the consequences, whatever they may be. So to actually put our action where our mouths are.
What kind of actions might we see churches, communities, or individuals take on January 1st as this resistance movement goes into full effect?
Well, you just heard Jen be able to talk about a couple of those, which was great. And so that way we can see some of those movements that will kind of start happening on January 1st. We do want to tell and remind folks that because this resistance movement is starting on January 1st, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the clergy are just going to go out and find as many, folks that they can to marry to be able to kind of have these mass weddings or anything like that. We will still be a part of counseling and of doing that work that we do with any couple that comes to be able to ask to be married together. But you can start to see some congregations starting January 1st, perhaps having weddings within their sanctuaries. You can see congregations that might be doing prayer vigils. Some congregations or communities might be, fasting for a couple of months to be able to be in prayer and fasting around being able to have the mind and the spirit of discernment around what they need to be doing. You will also see a lot of conferences that will be talking and speaking to their bishops, as Jen mentioned. And so there'll be a lot more conversations with the bishops and being able to bring the bishops into that conversation piece around what are the bishops going to do and kind of what are we, how are we going to be responsible and responsive with each other and within community together and within prayer with one another. And so there's going to be a lot of different things that could take place. And so we just encourage you that if you're listening outside of the Tulsa or Oklahoma area, to find what's going on within your own local community, because there's things that will be happening around the whole nation. I have friends out in Virginia where that's where I'm a pastor out there, and I'm on loan out here. But in Virginia, they're organizing and being a part of also being able to have worship services and prayer vigils and presenting things to their bishops. So this is going on around the whole U.S. and the world in a lot of ways.
Where can folks find resources and resource materials if their church wants to be a part of this, or maybe if just they as individuals want to connect more deeply to this movement?
One of the primary resources, especially with the movement we're talking about today, is resistharm.com. And there, churches and individuals can find resources for resistance. They are separated into themes such as prayer and worship and action and supporting clergy. They're also separated into themes for each month. So for January, the theme for the month is resist, and there are resources in each of those areas around the theme of resistance. For February, it's love. For March, lament. For April, light. And for May, witness. Some other resources are the RMN website, which is rmnetwork.org. The OK Next UMC, so the National UMC Next movement has a website, but our OK Next UMC group has a communications coordinator who's in the room with us. So Caeli would be the person to contact.
And so for that Oklahoma Next UMC, we're about to roll out a brand new Facebook page, and then we also have an email list, so you can get into contact with us that way.
Also on the Resist Harm website, there's a book for each month that you can also read and check out and read, and a study guide questions to go with it as well. And there's a lot of different resources on there. People also tell their stories. So it's a very powerful website if anybody's able to go to resistharm.com.
One more resource for Oklahomans would be the Oklahoma MUM. So there's confusion a little bit. There's a national movement called Mainstream United Methodists, and there is an Oklahoma movement which predates the national movement called Mainstream United Methodists. And so you can search either of those terms and you will stumble across both. But for those in Oklahoma, the MUM group has information available as well and is connected to all of these other resources.
Specifically in Oklahoma, several churches have coordinated to hold resist worship services. Is this service different than the Beloved service that we had this past November at Boston Avenue?
Yeah, absolutely. This is Sarah, and you'll see each month we'll have a worship service that revolves around the word of the month, so the word of that resistance movement each month. And so this first one with Resist, we're going to be focusing more on how we are called into action. And so in Tulsa, we're going to be looking at that through being able to have some postcards that we're going to sign and write letters to the bishop, and then those letters will be presented to the bishop at a gathering where he will meet with some of our lay folks from our congregations later on in the month in January. And so this resistance worship will have a little bit of a different feel to it than the beloved worship, as we're not particularly perhaps going to be remembering our baptisms, but it's more about being called into that vow. So living out that vow in a very concrete way. And each worship service will build upon the next. So you might see parts that will connect and kind of make sense and will be the same fluidity throughout, but you'll also have pieces that will be different each month. These services will also rotate around to different congregations. So that way, our first one, the beloved service, was held here at Boston Avenue, but we don't want to be the source of all the resistance worship services because it's bigger than us. And so it's going to be moving in Tulsa to St. Paul's UMC. And then this is also picking up to moving to some different spots around the state instead of just having that one service that was centralized here in Tulsa.
You mentioned the service at St. Paul's. Can you tell me when that service is and where the other services are as well?
Sure, I'll tell you. So on Sunday, January 5th, so right when you come back kind of from that Christmas break and from your New Year's time, and you can be able to gather together and have your resolution be the resistance movement. And so you can come and be part of this movement and kick off a great new year with us. And so we'll be at St. Paul's UMC on Sunday, January 5th, and the service will start at 5:30. It will also start at 5:30 in Oklahoma City at Mosaic United Methodist Church, and then we'll be at 7 p.m. in Lawton at St. Paul's United Methodist Church. So there's two St. Paul's, but one in Lawton and one in Tulsa.
Looking beyond January, what can we expect to happen as part of this resistance?
So this is Sarah again. I think that, again, you'll see a different worship service each month. There will be a different cards that we'll be writing each month to present to the bishop. There will perhaps be different actions that will be called upon to do each month. And then each one of these different movements and actions is going to build upon the next to be able to draw us towards the goal. Well, not the end goal, but the goal of right now is just pointing us and directing us towards May of 2020, when that next general conference is, and so kind of what that movement looks like. So who knows what the rest of these worship services will look like or what will happen on each month, because this is also a movement that continues to grow and to develop and is organic within its nature. So everything is not fully planned out right now as we're able to respond to what's happening and to be more active and not have to anticipate everything, but instead just be a part of what the Spirit's calling us to do within the movement each step of the way.
And even past General Conference 2020, we will have our annual conferences following General Conference for Oklahoma. That happens at the end of May. And so for us to have communication and further resistance and organizational tactics for annual conference. Not that we want to be combative, but that we need to be prepared to respond to whatever happens at general conference, and the turnaround is very fast. Mm-hmm. And then we will have jurisdictional conference, which is our regional body, which will also have some elections and some action to take. That happens in July. And again, it's a very fast turnaround after general conference. And so to be prepared and already be organized to see how we need to respond to continue the work is one of the goals.
Do you three have anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. We are located at 1301 South Boston Avenue in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.